So, I was a week late to getting Resident Evil 4 Remake on my Xbox Series X, and I'm about 2 hours into the game, and there's a lot of things with this game that I didn't expect, and a lot of really cool changes that have, as far as I'm concerned, made the game even better than I expected. And of course you have improved visuals, you have improved a bunch of everything, but in this video I'm going to go over my top 3 things about Resident Evil 4 Remake that I think are just absolutely awesome. So we're going to check that out just after this. So, before we get into this, I want to give a bit of a disclaimer. This isn't completely spoiler-free. There's definitely going to be some spoilers here, so if you're trying to get into this game as fresh as possible, you might not want to watch this video. But to start off, I'm going to start with number 1. And that's that this game feels a lot more like a survival horror title, so far anyways, than the original Resident Evil 4 did. Now, don't get me wrong, there were definitely some tense moments in the original Resident Evil 4, and there was some really cool stuff that felt really even creepy, I guess, or weird, but it didn't quite feel like the survival horror game coming off of the Resident Evil Remake or even Resident Evil 0 at the time when that game was released. So when I started playing this, what I was surprised by is there's definitely a survival feeling when you're crowded by enemies, and some of the enemies, they just seem a lot more vicious than they did in the previous Resident Evil, and that makes some of these moments tense. It even makes facing some of these guys one-on-one feel almost just scary, if that makes sense. There's also a lot more jump scares than were in the original Resident Evil 4, and there's even a lot more atmospheric changes that they added to this that makes this feel a little bit more in line with Resident Evil 7 or Resident Evil Village than it does with the original Resident Evil 4, which in comparison, having played it recently as well, it feels almost like an arcade action shooter compared to this. And that's also changed a bit by the gunplay feeling a little bit heavier in a good way. It just means that I feel like it's not the quick shots that you were getting in Resident Evil 4 and taking out hordes of enemies. You have to be a lot more calculated, and it can also add to the experience of being a little scared. Now, the second thing on my list that I really love that's been changed in Resident Evil 4 Remake is that the enemies now aren't just the same old enemies that you remember from before. There's a lot of changes. They're almost remixed, if that makes sense. So what I mean is, some of the enemies go into a stronger state if they're not killed in time, so their heads become contorted, and it's basically looks like the stage before the Las Plagas, as I recall it's called, fully bursts through their heads and starts attacking you. And this was unique to me. This actually threw me off at first when I saw it happen on one of the early encounters in the game. Now, the other cool thing about the enemies is they've also made some of the enemies take a lot more bullets and also attack you a lot more fiercely, like the Mad Chainsaw guy, for example. He seems a lot stronger than I recall, and he also seems a lot more dangerous if he gets up close. I know he could also one-kill you in the original Resident Evil 4, but I just recall it not feeling as frequent. In this case, it definitely feels a lot more panic-inducing when he's coming after you. There's also new enemies as well, and some that completely threw me off because I remembered some of these areas from the original Resident Evil, and then you're getting thrown with new monsters that just weren't there before. And I personally haven't played through this. I think it's a welcome change, and the really cool thing is it also makes this Resident Evil 4 Remake feel a lot more unexpected than I thought it was going to be, which is a good thing, because this isn't just a new coat of paint with better graphics. This is definitely its own experience in itself. Now, the number 3 last thing that I really like that was changed is the actual areas. Well, a lot of them are very familiar, and some of them are even recreations from the original Resident Evil 4. There are actually a lot of new areas and new routes and different areas that you have to go through. And what I mean by that is you're going through areas that seem ultra familiar from the original Resident Evil 4, and all of a sudden there's either a curveball that's been added or they've changed it entirely, and in some cases for the better, right? This isn't just a retreading of the original Resident Evil 4. These are actual areas now that are either more fleshed out, they're changed, they're remixed. To me, it makes this feel very fresh, and it also doesn't feel like I'm playing one of 1,000 different versions of Resident Evil 4 like I have in the past. It feels like I'm playing almost a new take on the game itself, with these changes in the areas and the changes in some of the encounters that happen in the areas as well. And so ultimately, I think some of these changes so far are completely awesome. So there you have it, guys. I really like the remake so far. I'm only about 2 hours or so into this game, but so far I really like what I'm experiencing, and I'm certain that from what I'm playing through and what I'm hearing from others, it's only going to get better from here. But as it stands, those are my top 3 things that I really like that were changed in Resident Evil 4 Remake, that based off of my initial impressions anyways. So let me know what you guys think. I know some of you already beaten it, but let me know what you guys think in the comments.